People are still connecting. Thank you. So we'll just give people a minute or two to come through. We can see that people are still connected and we're expecting quite a few more to join us. So we'll do the formal hello, welcome introduction in a couple of minutes. Right, can I just check with thumbs up? Vivian's flagging that she can't hear. Is everyone else able to hear me speaking? Yeah?
Yep.
So sorry, Vivian, I think there might be something at your end that's not quite working. You managed to sort that? Yeah, we've got lots of thumbs up. Just, I think, sorry, Vivian, I think this is your problem. Right, well, we're at 1 minute past. So given that we've got a very packed agenda, I think we should get going. So firstly, can I say a very big welcome to everyone for joining us this afternoon for our Way We Work, the Way We Live Now workshop, which is very much exploring both the opportunities and the potential disbenefits of hybrid working as it's now known. And we really want this to be very informal. It's not one of our big, hundreds formal set pieces. It's very much an informal exploration of how does it feel in terms of your organisation, but also you personally. I'm delighted that we've got a really good set of speakers who I'll look to introduce as we go along. And what they're going to do is very much share in an informal way their experience of hybrid working today. And what we started with, and I'm going to probably be struggling to do this because of the setup in terms of screen sharing, because my screen sharing icon has vanished, was going to talk to you about a model that the CBI produced. And we considered this, as well as being the chief exec of the Cumbria Local Enterprise Partnership. And for those that don't know me, I'm Jo Lappin. I also chair the Business and Economic Response and Recovery Group of the Local Resilience Forum. And clearly we're thinking about all of the issues that business and the wider community have faced as a result of both the pandemic, but also we've looked at EU exit issues. And we did spend some time with Inberg thinking very much about move to hybrid working and what that meant for Cumbria. And one of the models that we found was particularly useful was the one that was developed by the CBI. However, when we looked at that model, what really did strike us was that whilst it considered many of the issues that we felt were important, there were a couple of issues that it didn't quite pick up on. And what the model considers in terms of operating within a hybrid world is clearly health and well-being. How do you recruit and develop when you're not permanently working in the same place together? The different role for leadership, management and engagement, and then operations and practical support. How do you actually continue to deliver on productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, etc.? We all agreed that that was a really useful thinking framework, but what we did recognise is that that didn't cover two issues that we felt were important, which was equality and diversity, and also the legal implications of working in a very different way. So what we've done today is draw together a fabulous set of speakers to look at a bit more detail in a number of those areas. So we're going to lead off on the journey to hybrid working with Mark Brook, who's the manufacturing director, and Rachel Stanicliffe, who's the group HR director at James Walker. So really sharing their experience to date. We've then got Barry Leahy, who's Chief Executive of Playdale, and he's going to talk about it from a leadership perspective. So really sharing the leadership experience in new ways of working. We've then got Joanne Holborn, who's partner and head of employment law at Baines Wilson, to start to think through the legalities. And finally, and really importantly, we're going to look at equality and diversity in a hybrid world. And Sarah Swindley, who's the CEO of the Lake District Foundation, is going to share some of her thoughts with us. What we'd then like to do is spend some time looking at it from your perspective, and we're going to break up into some short workshop sessions. We'll then get some feedback, and then we'll close with a Q&A session with our speakers. So that's the plan for this afternoon's session. And if everyone's happy, without further ado, I'd really like to invite our first two speakers, Mark Brook and Rachel Stanicliffe, to lead us off with their journey to hybrid working. Mark and Rachel, over to you, please.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Introduce myself, I'm the manufacturing director for James Walker. I'm happy to share our learnings, and we've classed it as a journey because we're by no means there with a finalised policy and up and running, which I'll hand over to Rachel, who'll go into more detail. So I'll just cover off, I think like a lot of businesses, we already had an element of home working. We're a manufacturing business. Our largest site is in Cockermouth in Cumbria, but we have other sites throughout the UK, sales office based in Crewe, and then we have other sales offices and manufacturing facilities around the world. So early days, right, we were impacted by this in our foreign offices in terms of legally requirement to be able to send people home. And we reacted, as many businesses, really quite quickly to that and trying to send people home, getting the IT, the infrastructure working, and yeah, all very novel at first. And nobody expected that 15 months plus later, we've still got quite a large portion of our workforce working from home. So we left our manufacturing facilities operational and had a core staff who were required to keep operations running. But the rule was, and still is, if you can work from home, you work from home. We're now on a phased return to work. So we've brought some people back on site, mainly people who wanted to come back because of mental health reasons, family circumstances, or just they were required for more operational reasons. But I would say we've still got a large proportion of our back office support functions working from home. And we have a plan, hopefully within the UK by July, to try and bring some people back. But I don't foresee us ever getting back to that 100% for a number of reasons. One, because our offices aren't able to, it will all depend on what happens with social distancing rules, and we'll have to wait and see. But really, we've set up going forward an individual basis, at which point I'll hand over to Rachel as to say, how do we get to a more longer term policy that we can apply around the business?
Thanks, Mark. I'm Rachel Stanicliffe. I'm Group Head of HR for James Walker. As Mark's touched on there, we've got a number of different challenges that we've looked at across the whole of the business to understand what the impact of a hybrid or a smart working, whatever you want to term it, how that's going to impact us as a business. He alluded to the fact that hybrid working or flexible working is not new for us as a business. We've got quite a number of people who are contractually home or field based at the moment. So the principle is not new. It's not a new concept. We have, like many businesses probably will have, a flexible working policy. We have a home working policy in place, and therefore we're carrying out the DSE assessments that are required as part of it. So what I'm just going to touch on is some of the journey that we've been going through as a HR team to think about how do we put that into more appropriate either guidelines or policy to support the business in making it a more permanent operation within and across the UK businesses, and potentially wider as well. So one of the parts of the recognition is really thinking that about hybrid working actually being more about supporting a more flexible and agile workforce as well. It goes hand in hand with lots of different changes. It's got the opportunity to give people a better work-life balance as well. The challenge I think we've got is it's not going to be applicable to all roles across the business. So clearly there's a number of jobs, particularly in what we do with manufacturing, that simply can't be done from home. So there needs to be some form of analysis behind that. Whenever we're creating the guidelines, we've been thinking about what do we need to do to help, firstly, employees understand what is meant by hybrid or smart working. And then also what's critical to it is also managers understanding what their responsibilities are before we start agreeing to any requests across the business. We're choosing at the moment to develop it as guidelines. We may move it into more policy creation later on, but at the moment it's guidelines so that it can be shared across our businesses globally, because there may be a need for businesses then to adapt to any local legislation. For us, it was a case that we couldn't simply implement something overnight. It was never going to happen as simply as that, because there needs to be a clear and consistent approach about how the business is going to handle any requests. And also, particularly because there's likely to be cost implication on setting up somebody on a more permanent basis to work from home. So just to give you a steer on some of the things that we're thinking about in terms of our guidelines, one of the key things will be about review of somebody's eligibility to be able to work from home on a more permanent basis. So some form of analysis around which roles could and which can't do the hybrid working. So there needs to be some form of formal assessment about that. There are questions around people who are part-time workers versus full-time workers, clearly in the remit of you can't be seen to be discriminating, but it's about how much face-to-face contact is needed within that role that the person is actually doing. We've thought about things like disciplinary and performance improvement. So if that's in place for a person, is it realistic at this time for somebody to actually be accepted for a flexible working or a hybrid working approach? What other distractions might be in place? It's formed part of an assessment. So if somebody's got a young family, what childcare provision do they have in place to ensure that they're not being disturbed as part of their normal working day? Do they have the appropriate working space or a dedicated office space? Because we've got this big challenge at the moment where we were, I guess, forced into a situation where telling people they need to be able to work from home. That was the guidelines from the government. Everybody needs to work from home where possible. So people were setting up spaces at home which are not traditionally a home office space. So it could have been on a kitchen table, anywhere. And that's not necessarily an appropriate permanent long-term approach to being able to work from home. So that has to form part of the review that we're doing. Then it's about understanding what we need to do to help the employee and the manager to understand what it takes to be able to work from home. Again, part of the practice has been, how well have you got on when you have been working from home? Mark's alluded to it. The mental health aspect comes into play. For some people, it's been very, very challenging being out of that office environment. So it's not going to be for everybody. So people need to understand what is involved for them as a person if you're actually going to be more permanently based from home. Can you cope with it? Have you got good time management? Can you be flexible? Are you able to cope with that reduced level of social contact? What happens for the manager from the perspective if they're given multiple requests from within their team? So there has to be a balance between the business cover and people being in and out of the office. So that has to be thought about in a bit more detail. If hybrid working is agreed to, then there needs to be some consideration around the communication that goes on, how often you're going to meet with that person, how are you going to manage their performance, because we may need to do that slightly differently than we're doing it when we're with somebody face-to-face in an office. And also, as I touched upon earlier, the cost implication, Do they have a laptop or a proper desktop, multiple screens? Do they have a right chair or equipment? And the aspects of data security as well. So they may be looking at sensitive data at home. How are they storing and looking after that data? For managers, considering how they manage people remotely, completely different potentially from how they've done that before. So we may need to be thinking about training our managers slightly differently. And then moving into the final bits that we've been thinking about is what happens if circumstances change? So do we implement this with a trial period for 4 to 6 months to see how it works out? What do we do in terms of putting in about a right to review after a period of time? Because if it doesn't work, we need to maybe revert back to what was in there normally. What happens about the health and welfare of the individual if that changes over time? What do we need to be mindful of? What about if the team or the work arrangements change and we want to step back to where they normally were? How do we stand in if that comes into play? So where we are now is looking at all of those aspects, and that's the whole point of me wanting to be on this call today, is because I'm really keen to understand how other people might have approached it. These are things we're thinking about. We've started our draft of the policy. We've got an initial draft so far, and now it's under review, and it's the start of our journey to be able to implement that on a more permanent basis. Over to you, Jo.
Brilliant. Mark, Rachel, thank you very, very much for sharing your journey to date. And I think collectively, you've done us a brilliant job in providing a platform for other speakers, because the kind of issues that you flagged, hopefully we're going to be unpacking with other inputs, but also when we come together in the workshop session. Rachel, when you were talking about well-being, I think one of the statistics that has really, really concerned me was an ONS study that said that there seems to, in terms of mental well-being, a disproportionate impact on young people and particularly young women. And, you know, the statistic I saw was that 43% of young women under 30 have faced particular challenges in terms of well-being. So just wanted to ask a question about, have you seen any sort of gender, because it ties into what Sarah's going to speak about later, any gender or age differences between the general well-being of the workforce?
I can't say that I've seen any gender specific, certainly seen an increased number of mental health issues. We're very aware of that in our business. We've actually had around about 20 people trained now as mental health first aiders to try and address some more of this issue. We have, certainly at the Cockermouth site, they have regular monthly meetings and share that best practice around other areas of the business. But it'd be interesting to see if there's anything specific around whether it's disparate and different within the genders. I've not seen that before.
Right, so it's pretty spread across the organisation.
What I'm understanding at the moment, yeah.
I would agree that it's more the younger generation. So it's a good point, and thinking about it, the instances we know about, it's in that late 20s, early 30 age group. Whether that's social or the fact that they're on their own, maybe in a flat, you know, they haven't got families around them, and yeah, so that I think where we have had incidents, it's not really a work issue. It ends up being the straw that breaks the camel's back almost, because under COVID they've not had social interaction, and some people were very work related, and that was their social interaction, and that's been removed from them. And in those cases, we have made the decision to bring people back on site, even though they can work from home.
I guess with young people as well, particularly people who've only just started out in the working arena, they may just be learning about structure of work. So to be able to try and do that on your own without having the guidance around you might be increasingly difficult as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful, thank you. And I'm not going to abuse my position as host and chair by asking lots of questions, because I really want our audience to be asking the questions. So that was a really helpful start point, Mark and Rachel. And I wonder now if we can hand over to Barry Leahy, MBE, who's going to talk to us about the Playdale and his leadership experience. Barry, thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Barry Leahay, and like Joe says, I'm the CEO at Playdale Playgrounds. We're based in South Cumbria, and we're a manufacturer. Everything's manufactured there, and we're lucky enough to export that to 51 countries around the world. So I sell fun all around the world. So that's not a bad start for a job, isn't it? And I'm trying to fill time now, obviously, because they didn't set the scene. They absolutely nailed it, those two. And Rachel talked through a lot of the things really that we've gone through as a leadership team. But bringing it back to leadership, I believe I have 3 responsibilities, and I've always had 3 responsibilities over the last however long that I've been lucky enough to lead teams. And for those, and there, yes, there's a contentious order, but I'll say it in this order. It's profit, people, and then the planet is coming more so. And I'm sure someone's going to pick me up for the order, but and for saying profit first. But without profit, we don't have jobs to employ people. So the experiment that has been forced upon us, if you like, in the last 12 months has been very, very timely, because like Mark said and Rachel, we have hybrid working, and we always have done, because we've got field sales teams, we've got people that work from homes. And when the crisis hit last year, a bit like, James Walker, we've got distributors in the East, and we could see what was coming in other countries. And yes, we were having conversations, but that didn't stop. And I wouldn't lie to you and say it wasn't chaos at first. In that first week of hitting that button, it didn't feel great. And our number one responsibility at that moment in time was people. And, we quickly pushed that button, and we did all the, we got everyone at home safely. We got the technology there safely. We did all the tests around data security, etc. very, very quickly. I think we did an exceptional job. And we went through then trying to do the risk assessments and looking at home stations, etc., which I believe legislation allowed us to get around it at the time, but that's coming back. And that, we've got to be very clear that once Mr. Johnson says, you don't have to work from home anymore if possible, then all this legislation will come back, and, we have to do proper risk assessments, which is a burden on a business, and there's a cost implication, especially an SME. So we did that, but all that time, I think in the back of our minds was, how do we protect the business and the profitability? How do we keep this a viable commercial business? So we had to look at starting to look, what I would say is my 4th P of productivity, and how do we measure it? So I'm not one to waste a crisis, and people that know me was like, right, okay, this is, it is going to be an experiment, but let's measure it, because we've been pushed to provide this more, maybe, and we get the flexible requests and the agile working, which we are. For an SME, I mean, Rachel will probably shake her head and talk, but we've got about 40 different working patterns. All right, it's ridiculous. That's how agile we are. We make up roles. We don't job share. We have like bit roles. There's about 6 people in some places doing, half a day each. We're that flexible. So it's not as if we've not done it, but we know what our most profitable and most efficient way of working is, and we've got there over a number of years and making lots of mistakes. So we weren't just going to throw that out the window. So for the last, I'd say 9 to 12 months, 9 months specifically, is what's the exit plan and how do we come back out of this? And it was to try to measure how we were doing. Now, the good news is we haven't seen a drop in productivity, but we haven't seen a vast increase in productivity. But what we have seen, some real things that Rachel was talking about, I've had people beg me, literally beg me, to work in the office due to their mental health, of being isolated. And I go back to, I've got a responsibility for people, and I took the role of, if people want to work from the office, they can work from the office, because there's lots of other stuff going on as well. You don't know what the working conditions are and all of that. And then we had other people that, definitely didn't want to work from the office and still want to continue. And we're going to take that by a case basis. But what we've realized over a period of time as a leadership team, it's definitely filtered, down to us, is that cohesion, that team has definitely been missing. And, you know, we talk about in Cumbria, we've got a higher number of job changes in the last quarter. I remember hearing a statistic from somewhere, and, you know, well, you know, how many people have started a new job in the last year? You know, where's the bonding? Where's the team adhesion? You know, we all know when you're in close proximity, that team is stronger. It's like water, isn't it? You know, you're a stronger column. You move forward together, and we've missed that. And that's why I think at Playdale, after all the analysis we've done, be it that we're going to be flexible and consider, I think we've come to the conclusion, a bit like a Goldman and Sachs, but maybe not as abrupt as they've been, is, you know, it's a failed experiment in our terms. We've learnt everything that we'd assumed over the last number of years, and probably tried over a number of years, but the focus has been so laser focused on, you know, hybrid working, that we've had to really dig deep and, you know, and then uncover maybe a little bit's been new to us, but a lot of it is like, oh, well, that's what we actually assumed it would be, you know, over the last 10 years as we've been further pushed. But what it's given us is given us that rehearsal for when now what has been forced upon, I think, British businesses, it becomes another ask for employees. If you're going to be the employer of choice, you know, it's no longer health benefits, it's no longer gym membership, it's no longer, you know, now at the bottom of it, it's, oh, and do you offer hybrid working? Because my friends only do 2 days in the office and 3 days at home. And you've got to make that work for the commerciality of the business. So we're doing models around that, and what's it to them and what's it to us, and if we don't do this, it's bringing some opportunities, but we have to find those opportunities to make it commercially viable. And if we're to move to a new premises, we can take an opportunity maybe to have it. But at this moment in time, we've got a premises with, you know, X amount of chairs, and, you know, and the lights go on in the whole room, not just over the 2 desks of the people in, and, you know, and it heats the whole room and things like that. So a lot of leadership. So the stuff that Rachel went through, that she did a quick fire, you know, bullet point on, we've had hours of discussion on each bullet point, you know, and after, behind those discussions, you know, the stress it's putting on leadership teams is there's then models and financial models and spreadsheets. And so, you know, from a leadership perspective, it isn't just saying about a tick in the box. So what else have I wrote down here? What it has done, huge opportunity for us, and I guess one of the learnings then from it, a big positive, is it's opened up our eyes about geography and place, as in demographics. I think Mark mentioned that, you know, why do I need, you know, we may have an engineering shortage in our area, but why can't they be based in Hampshire or Spain? You know, it's definitely opened our eyes there. We've just employed an engineer that isn't in the area. However, he's actually told us only yesterday he's thinking he might relocate now. But, you know, we tried. And but long distance relationships don't work, do they? Or so people tell you, you know, and I guess that saying came from somewhere. So, you know, we've got to be careful, haven't we, about what we actually think. And I'm just really cautious, I guess. I'm moving forward with, you know, with caution, that we've got to be careful what we wish for or what we set a precedent for, because once you set that precedent, it's really hard to backtrack from it. And we are still, I believe, the 39th most productive country in the world. And yes, we've actually gained in our productivity in other areas in the last 12 months, but I'm pretty sure all my competition in Germany and France and the USA and in Asia would have also been doing a lot with their working practices. They're moving forward. So if we actually instill something that may also, you know, that is almost ticking a box, then we could actually be harming that profitability P for me, because I won't be globally competitive in 5 years. So I'm actually doing a disservice to the people by, you know, delivering something I think is better. So as a leadership, it's a real conundrum. Did I fill enough of 10 minutes?
Barry, perfect timing, as if you'd actually looked and checked that you were working to 10 minutes. On the productivity point, you said you've seen some marginal gains, but nothing significant. Where have you seen the positive gains vis-a-vis areas where you were expecting something you didn't?
Okay, well, you know, the negatives, we realised after a month you couldn't make 18-foot long swing legs on kitchen tables, so it definitely wasn't in factories, in the production units. No, in some of the quiet time work where people, you know, project type work where people want to get their head down and say, but not everyone has a project, and not everyone definitely can't justify that those projects are going to be 5 days a week. So, but we've seen those. So a lot of our projects have been fast tracked, you know, and we've done an awful lot of education. Playdale do an awful lot of education. You know, we've got 30% of the workforce doing NVQs. Well, people have been able to fast track the studying and have got ahead on the studying on quiet time at home. And we're now starting to see that drip feed into the business and people applying those principles, which has actually helped. You know, it's been a blessing in that respect. So it's this quiet time where it needs, you know, where it's intense, where it's phone calls and quotes, people need to ask for advice, and it's to use that network around them. And we've seen that probably not so, you know, I've got to have a call with someone to qualify what I'm doing here, and that person's not available. When you can turn your chair around or walk to a quick meeting room, I guess that's where we're seeing it not help us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Barry. And I think that productivity and efficiency will be a good one to see what attendees think when we get into our workshop chats. So great as always. Thank you very much. And now delighted to bring in Joanne Holborn and this was something that was mentioned when we spoke to colleagues in James Walker about potential legal implications. And as Jo is a lawyer, she will always start with the disclaimer. So over to you, please, Jo.
Thanks very much, Jo. So yes, well, I will start with my disclaimer. So just to be clear, we're not giving legal advice today, and because the session is being recorded, so we're not entirely sure, obviously, when people will watch this. But as Jo said, I'm an employment lawyer. Unlike Barry, I don't spread fun around the world, unfortunately, but do my best to try and make life a bit more bearable for businesses by offering help and support when there are difficult issues to be faced. And I've been doing this for over 25 years now, and I don't think I've experienced, well, I know I haven't experienced a year like the one we've all just been through. So lots of challenges facing lots of businesses. At Baines Wilson, we're also on the kind of journey to hybrid working and are just working out exactly what we're going to do. So very similar position to other businesses. But I realise I'm not here to talk about that today. So I am going to talk about the legal implications of a move to hybrid working, because despite the fact it's been forced on us for the last 12 months, in actual fact, if we're wanting to make this a more permanent arrangement, then that involves a potential change to terms and conditions of employment, and changing terms and conditions, particularly for your whole workforce, can be a particularly difficult exercise to go through. And there's basically only 5 ways that you can change terms and conditions, and 2 of which I wouldn't recommend in the current circumstances. So I think the starting point for any business is to look at the current contractual arrangements and see what is actually permitted by your contract of employment. And it may be that you don't need to make changes because there might be enough flexibility built into what you have already to mean that you don't actually have to do a formal change as such. It's just a question of talking to staff and implementing what's already there. And it's best not to forget that, because often we set off on these sort of exercises and we haven't actually looked at what we've already got in place. So that would be the starting point. However, if you don't have something that's permitted by the contract, then your only options are to either try and agree a change with the workforce as a whole, or individuals in particular, depending on what you're doing. You could rely on an implied term, but that wouldn't be something I would recommend in the current circumstances. You could impose a unilateral change, which I most definitely wouldn't recommend, because you're likely to get claims for constructive unfair dismissal. And then in the absence of anything else, then what you might have to do is to terminate employees' employment and then re-engage them on new terms, which if you've got a sizable workforce, then you're potentially looking at collective consultation in the first instance, followed by a period of individual consultation, very similar to, in fact, it's the same provisions as you would undertake in a collective redundancy exercise. It's under the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act. So, but obviously before you would go into a situation where you were terminating and re-engaging, then obviously entering into a dialogue with either individual employees or the workforce as a whole to try and reach agreement is going to be the best way to do that. So hopefully you don't get into that situation where you trigger Section 188 of the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act. Good communication is key in these circumstances. So talking to employees about what you're potentially planning, going over what some of the points that Rachel covered as well. Trying to work out what's going to work for the business, what's going to work for employees, and trying to get that buy-in from them is going to be key. And also making sure that you don't set a precedent and you can't change if it doesn't work. So I think selling it to the workforce very much as we're going to have to see how this works, and we're going to have a review at whatever stage your review are, so that you're not setting something in stone. Because as Barry has said as well, to a certain extent, this is going to be an experiment for a lot of businesses. And also picking up on what Barry said, to remain competitive, employees are going to expect flexibility. They've had it for the last 15 months. Before the pandemic, it was seen as the number one employee benefit, and now it is even. I think that the CBI report you referred to, Joe, refers to, I think it's 91% of employees looking for this. So we're going to have to try and innovate to remain competitive as well. And even those, I appreciate there's certain jobs that can't be done from home, but can you look at shift patterns for different levels of flexibility? Can you change things around so that you're just offering something extra? Because we've always struggled in Cumbria with, to a certain extent, recruitment. And whilst this, as Barry has said, provides opportunities, it's also going to have its challenges as well. But there's so much I could talk about here. I'm going to struggle to fit it in my 10 minutes, but essentially, in terms of the mechanics, quickly, if you do get to a point where you can't reach agreement and you've got over 20 employees and you're going to have to look to terminate and re-engage, then you need a good business case as to why that is necessary. And then you're going to have to follow a fair procedure. So you're potentially electing representatives if you don't have a recognised trade union. If you have a recognised trade union, then you'll be consulting with them about the proposed changes. Consultation, if it's over 20 but less than 100, you're a 30-day consultation. If it's over 100, then you're looking at a 45-day consultation period. Once the consultation's over and done with, then, and it's often the case that the union or the employee reps won't actually agree a change, and you might have to have a ballot. After that, you've then got to have potentially individual consultation if you've not been able to get a collective agreement. So you're looking at, maybe a couple of weeks, maybe longer, depending on the size of your workforce, to consult with individuals about the change. And then ultimately, if you can't reach agreement, but you believe that that's what you've got to do for the business, then you're going to have to terminate and re-engage. And to do that, you've got to give the longer of either contractual notice or statutory notice. So if, for example, you've got a long-serving employee on statutory notice, that's going to be 12 weeks. So your lead time to affect this change, if you can't do it by agreement, is going to be potentially considerable. So in terms of your planning, you need to be working these things into your long-term planning if you end up in that situation. I think given where we are and the fact that a lot of people have been working flexibly, I doubt very much that many businesses will be in a position where they're forced to potentially terminate and re-engage. That also obviously involves issuing a HR1 as well, which I should mention. But hopefully, if you get your communication right, you should be able to reach agreement with employees in terms of what you're planning, and try and keep as much flexibility as you can in there, so that you can change if it's not working for you, would be my top tip.
Lovely, thank you very much, Jan. We have now got Mark Brook kindly kicking us off with the questions, and we're going to save that for the Q&A panel. But can I just ask a very quick one before we hand over to Sarah? What's sort of the interaction between the requirements on business in terms of legislation vis-a-vis the national emergency legislation from government that basically said you should work from home if you can? So what's the interaction between those things and the responsibilities for employers?
They're more or less in direct conflict. Because as employers, we had, when we actually told everybody they had to work from home as of last March or April, most people didn't follow the correct processes to do so. But because it was a national emergency, nobody's brought claims essentially. I think that's one of those things where most people probably thought that the national legislation, because it was emergency legislation, overrode other things. Not one to debate now, but clearly one that we should, in our bird capacity, make sure that everyone's clear about that understanding and the business requirement. But I think this is one we'll pick up again with Tom in the Q&A. Yeah, but no, everybody was in the same boat, and there is a provision actually in the Trade Union and Labour Relations Consolidation Act that allows you to run what's called a special circumstances defence, which is, the debate. It never actually happened, but there was debate in legal circles about whether that would be successful if you were required to run it, and the consensus was it probably would be in those circumstances. But the reality was, because of the enormity of the situation we were all facing, we all just had to do it, and employees were not going to complain in the circumstances that we were all facing. And now they're all out of time for claims as well, so we're all okay.
That's that's a final reassuring point to close on, Joanne. So thank you very much. I know you need to whiz away to another meeting, and your colleague Tom is going to step in for the Q&A. So lovely. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, it's been really interesting so far. I'm sorry I can't stay for the whole thing, but thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And our last session now is from Sarah Swindley. As I said at the top of the meeting, Sarah's the CEO of the Lake District Foundation, but she's also one of our board members. And Sarah's going to talk to us on the potential equality and diversity implications of hybrid working. So Sarah, over to you, please.
Thanks, Jo, and good afternoon, everybody. I've definitely got more questions than answers, I think, in relation to a lot of this. So very keen to hear from others, and I think we're all very much learning together around a lot of this, aren't we? So I run what is, it is a business, it's a charity, it's a small business, and we've been able to maybe do things that larger businesses working in different ways would not be able to do. I'm very much aware my workforce is only 8 strong, and I've run charities with much bigger workforces where some of the stuff we've tried to focus on wouldn't have been possible. That being said, I'm aware that's the size of quite a lot of SMEs and micro businesses in the county, so hopefully it's relevant. So I'll share some of the things I've been thinking about in my own organisation. I also have governance responsibilities in a couple of different places and directorships as well, where I seem to end up with the equality and diversity remit for some reason. So what we definitely all do know that the impact of the pandemic hasn't been equal in a large number of ways. We have definitely seen a gender gap arise, and particularly a reverting to women taking the bulk of childcare and homeschooling responsibilities. I will always caveat that with not all women and not all men, but I think the statistics definitely do bear that out. And as has been mentioned already, we know that having a quiet space to work at home is a luxury that simply many do not have, and that poverty and vulnerability have been highlighted and exacerbated by the world that we live in. So that sets some of the context of, I know, what we're thinking about for all our workforce. We all know that we will all have people in our teams who've had bereavement, loss, really challenging times, partners that have lost work, all of that kind of stuff through this time. So I think equality and diversity, whilst it can feel challenging, has probably never been more important. We know as well that jobs that can be a hybrid or able to be worked at home are far more likely to be graduate roles, far more likely to be the sort of more traditional white collar project based type of activity that happens in organisations. So how do we set a framework for our workforces that is mindful of that, but means that where we can, we give people opportunities to do other things as well? It's easy to be quite negative about some of this, but I really do see as well there's been some massive positives in our way of working virtually that I know in my own organisation I'm really keen to hang on to, and just very simple things like more diverse voices being heard in meetings, having a mute button, having equality of access to people that have different sorts of diversity, different ways of thinking can be brought forward in organisations, which helps us, it's just part of being a healthy organisation to listen to different ways of working, which does, links to what Barry was talking about, but our models of leadership are changing, and the sorts of skills we need as leaders to draw the best out of people in this new way of working is definitely changing as well. We know that, as has been mentioned, we can draw a workforce from potentially a much wider pool of talent and allow flexible work in very different ways, which can potentially accelerate the number of women, the number of people from minority ethnic communities who may be able to take on leadership positions in the future. I do think it's important that we remember we will have to be deliberate in some of our actions in order to make some of this happen, though, as well. I think a lot of this, we've got this opportunity in front of us. It won't happen by accident. I think it takes some kind of conscious planning to really make the most of that. So what we're still trying to do in my own small organisation, because like everybody, massively a work in process. As I say, only a really small team of 7 or 8 staff. And the sort of work we do is quite kind of project-based, creative-based, that sort of stuff. So we did right at the beginning of the pandemic, actually, obviously moved to home working quite quickly. It was fairly straightforward for us to do that. And we have now taken the decision to be a entirely home-based organisation. So we have, I'm aware my part-time landlord is on the call here, so we are hosted in part by the National Park Authority. I spotted Julie earlier as well. So we still retain the ability to be able to book out some rooms and some hot desking space when needed. Whether we'll use that in the future or not, I think we'll maybe come on to that. So we have gone to entirely home working model, but we are continuing to sort of meet in person now we're able to, and have kind of walking meetings, that sort of stuff in the outdoors to really kind of keep hold of some of that creative space. Some of the immediate challenges we have faced in such a small team, and when the stuff going on in a tiny team, you're kind of more vulnerable to some of this. I've got a lot of younger, well, not a lot, but younger staff with caring responsibilities. I think all the team have either immediate children at home, young children, are pregnant. 2 of my staff are pregnant or have very new babies as well, or at the other end of the scale, or some of us have elderly parents we're caring for. I've got kids at home and elderly parents to care for, so you know, a lot of us in that middle-age squeeze bit as well. So and people have faced some significant challenges, and what we've been able to do is really kind of retain flexibility to be able to respond to those challenges. And I'm so it's vital that we hang on to that, certainly in my organisation. What we've seen is that we've taken a conscious decision that actually our working patterns now are about outputs rather than hours worked. So I've absolutely removed the sort of 9-to-5 working culture in the organisation. My staff have, not always as clear as they need to be, but pretty clear programs to work on and a timescale within which we want to see that activity produced, you know, a piece of work taken forward. But we're now not checking at all what time people are starting, what time people are leaving. They don't have to ask permission to go to the doctors, take mum to hospital, you know, all the stuff that takes a lot of time in workforces. As I say, I recognise that we have the luxury of being a small workforce that makes that possible. But what I'm really seeing is a massive increase in productivity as a consequence, and an increase in commitment of staff. I think we were already quite a tight team with a fairly flat hierarchy, really. I'm not a great leader by any means. I'm pretty much, my only skill is surrounding myself with people that know more than I do about stuff. And so I'm very much, I don't know, but let's bring people together that do know about stuff. So I think, you know, we have a good kind of tight team there, but we have new challenges down the line about bringing new people into that team, which can feel a bit cliquey as well. So, you know, that's our next part of this journey. But what we've definitely seen is that, and this links very much to diversity and thought diversity and protected characteristics as well. People will have more productive times of the day. If you're working on something that needs that creative part of your brain, it might be 9 o'clock at night is the best time for you to sit down and actually sort of produce the documents and the stuff that you need to do. And so, you know, a lot of this is on trust, and I'm able to kind of trust my team to produce stuff when they need to. They see me working pretty hard, but some days I'll say, I'm full today, I'm going for a swim, you know, something like that. And we've been able to, so a lot of this is about culture, really, that we've been able to really shift that culture. And I really want to make sure that we hang on to this. So what does this mean in relation to equality and diversity? I think it does mean that our working patterns are available to a broader pool of people who maybe haven't come through a traditional background, have maybe have disadvantage in different ways, but have got real skills that they can explore in a different sort of organisation, really. Maternity has been a massive thing for us, so the kind of more mundane stuff, although not for those individuals, but thinking about risk assessments and how we make sure that those working patterns work for women that are newly pregnant, working from home, and whereas you would have done a previous kind of desk-based risk assessment to check they were okay in the office, how we kind of work around that. But equally, much more inclusive to be able to just say, you know, take whatever time you need to go to appointments, all the rest of it. But equally, if women are suffering from morning sickness, not feeling great at different parts of the day, we can accommodate all of that within the working day at that time as well. I think the drawing from a wider pool of talent geographically is really important as well for us to consider. We know that Cumbria isn't a particularly diverse county, and I think this is our opportunity to really kind of think about that. And it's interesting what was just said. I think it was Barry mentioned that somebody started remote working and is now thinking about moving to the county. We've seen this as well. So I think, you know, how great is that as an opportunity for the county for almost a try before you buy kind of experience of working within a team in the county, and then thinking about, okay, how can we support you to make a life here, move your family here? And I think that's a massive thing that we can think about in the future to draw talent towards us, towards our businesses, towards our organisations. Because the flip side of that is the risk is our resident communities are able to access working opportunities that weren't previously open to them. So we've really got to make sure that we're able to address that and look at that from those different perspectives. Some of the things that I'm really watching for, and particularly I'm a trustee of a school, and it's something that we've been looking at there, is about presenteeism, and really thinking about those who continue to work from home. are still seen as being part of the team and productive members of the team as well, and that you don't end up with a dual culture starting to emerge, because I think there's a real risk of that as we move to different ways of working, where you have, and that's definitely been a challenge in the school, where there's been a bit of a kind of more traditional, if you're in very early and leaving very late, then you're the most productive member of staff. And this is where equality starts to be a real challenge, because people have taken on maybe newly caring responsibilities, haven't got that flexibility in their working day anymore to be able to do that, but are still obviously valuable, productive members of the team. So really thinking about how we accommodate that. And some of that will be, I think, when we are part in the office, when we're using our hot desking, just checking who's actually doing that and making sure that we don't move to a place where, and some of this is again about gender, and make no apologies for that. Offices used to be the domain of men who were staying late and able to do that, had the flexibility to not necessarily have those direct caring responsibilities, or younger people who equally didn't have caring responsibilities. I think we all need to collectively check that the people we have in our office, that we don't start to have a kind of homogenous group of people who are always in there as well. And you know, it will just need focus for us to continue to do that. As they're not having a good space at home is a really tricky one for people, because you're not going to be able to buy people a better house, are you? That's the reality of it. So really thinking about how we help people to have quiet home working spaces, but equally how we maybe collectively as businesses look at you know, kind of hot desking arrangements where we've got shared workspaces that can work, which isn't quite as formal as being in the traditional workplace, gives some of that flexibility, but is a quiet location where people can come to work. And we've got a number of partners who've said, because it was quite scary to come out of the office, but we're fortunate to have a number of people said, oh, well, there's always a desk in the corner here if somebody needs to come in. And I think formalising some of those arrangements in the future will be really important. So massive opportunities, kind of in a nutshell, to create a more diverse, more equal workforce in the future, but it will need some real focus and some positive decision making and some bravery from us as leaders. You know, I think there's a lot of us have got a bit of control freakery, and that's why we end up being running organisations. I've really had to kind of, I do trust my team. I definitely trust my team because I've recruited them all, and I trust my ability to spot talent in people. But equally, I think there's something about, okay, as our teams grow, as things sort of bed in, as the future unfolds, really thinking about our own ways of being as well. Real risks around overwork. I think that's, rather than people skiving off at home, I think I've definitely found I've had to massively stop people overworking, and that has that huge wellbeing benefit, and that we don't then build in an expectation that productivity will be at a level that is unsustainable in the future, just checking what we're benchmarking against as well. So it may sound like that's not all about equality and diversity, but I think these are the considerations that we've got to have when we think about, okay, how can people with protected characteristics play a huge part in our workforce? How can we make sure that we have the best, most productive workforce that is diverse? Because we know diverse organisations are the most effective organisations. Massive opportunities for us. Definitely a work in progress here. I'm kind of, making sure we've got time to check in as my team are out and about doing stuff. It's like, crikey, who's going to do this really mundane thing today that I do need doing right now? So just sort of making sure we've got check-in times and key points in the week when I know that I can really call on people has been really important. You know, I can say in the Leadership Foundation, we're already a leaner, more productive organisation, but we just really need to make sure that we continue to be a happy one as well.
Sarah, fabulous, thank you. And you've deliberately overrun by 2 minutes, so I can't ask you a question. So perfect timing, you get off the hook. Don't worry, you've not escaped for long, you're coming back shortly. So can we invite everybody to join in with now some workshops where you've got an opportunity to feed your thoughts in. Within each of the workshops, we're going to break out into 3. There will be a member of the team, it will be either Maisie, Lindsay or John, who will explain exactly what you're going to do. It really is rapid fire, and it'd be great if we could get one person just to do the headlines. So we really want to know, in this world of hybrid working, what have been the top 3 benefits? What have been the top 3 disbenefits? What's been your top 3 learning points, and agreeing these collectively? And because we want to make sure that we give all of our businesses support going forward, what support would you find most helpful? So if today you say, I've been fascinated by any of the issues covered by our 4 sets of speakers. I'd really like to know more. What we can certainly do is get some specialist support and advice on those themes. So if that sounds like a plan in terms of your rapid fire sessions, we'll be looking to pull you back at exactly 12 minutes past. So by the wonder of technology, the Queen of Zoom, Jen Hewitt, will now send you all into your specific workshops. And we are noticing some of you are creeping away without going to the workshops. Jen, over to you, please.
They're going into them now, Joe.
Well, people have clearly been having a good time in some meeting rooms, because looking at the smiles on people's faces, I'm really curious as to what you're going to say. So in terms of headline feedback, really hope you had some opportunity to have discussions on how it's working, how it's feeling for each of you. And on the feedback, if I can start, Maisie, with your group, who wants to give us the headline feedback?
So that would be Rachel who's feeding back for us. Thank
Hi
Rachel?
there. No, me again, sorry.
Rachel, you failed the test. You needed to find another colleague. I did warn speakers, it may be you again.
Oh, that's fine. I'll summarise quickly. Benefits then, we talked about the fact that it enabled people to concentrate on projects and gave us opportunities for more focus on things that we may not have had. Good as part of a work-life balance. For example, it helped out with schooling, with reduced need to travel to and from work. There was also elements around the carbon footprint and the environmental impact with less travelling. The benefit of attracting new recruits and reduction in overheads. Some of the disbenefits, we also recognise, actually some of the benefits could also be disbenefits as well, depending on how you look at it. And some of the other things that we looked at in terms of disbenefits is people knowing when to start and stop work in their home life. So what's the ability to be able to switch off at the right point in time. Data protection was also an issue. So the fact that data protection is still an issue, even if you're working at home and you've got small children running around with your crucial piece of paper, that's not quite the way to go. Having access to data, which you could have gone to and found out from other people in the office, is very limited when you're working from home, and having contact with people. Policing when people go out on site and are returning to home, are they following the rules of COVID? Are they doing any lateral flow tests, etc., things like that? Responding to incidents on sites, we can't do that as quickly if we're actually working at home at that point in time. And the lack of informal conversations. So actually some of those, what they used to call, I think they used to call them water cooler conversations, didn't they? Where you can actually learn a lot more than would you if you had a formal meeting. Some of the key things we just scraped in around learning lessons. So the fact that the taxation system has the potential to change, or there's been discussions around whether that's going to change because there may be less corporate taxation, but actually could there be an implication for home working taxation instead, which then wouldn't be beneficial to anybody looking at doing home working? Will they want to do it? And some of the support we talked about was maybe useful to look into whether local authorities could support with things like a virtual desk space or a shared hub workspace, so that if people want to be able to get together in that environment, then there is an opportunity using the local authorities and spaces that are available there. I hope I've summarised that quickly enough.
Rachel, that was brilliant and perfect. And not only did you do it very quickly, you gave us more than 3, both benefits and disbenefits. So to your group, brilliantly well done.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Can I bring in John, who's providing your feedback?
Tom and Sarah managed to avoid it, courtesy of Sophie, who very kindly volunteered to dive in and help out. So it's Sophie.
Thank you.
Hi there. So the benefits that we had, work-life balance, and flexible working kind of linked up with that as well. Productivity seemed to be one of the top benefits as well. And with that, we also had time with pets. I feel like I've met everybody's pets on Teams in my workplace. The disbenefits we had were training and learning, particularly for inducting new staff members. The social contact, feel like a lot of people have said they've missed the day-to-day contact with the staff. It's just not the same at home. And also the risk of burnout for staff members as well, and the challenges that you experience in spotting that risk. The top 3 learning points that we have were being able to manage teams remotely. And we also had communications with all the staff, and both of those, to be honest, we've said that those are learning points to be developed really. So obviously we're still looking at different ways to communicate, particularly with our frontline staff at where I work. And our outputs as well. So we said that was another learning point in how we measure our outputs, and there must be better ways of measuring rather than just looking at number of staff on desks. Some of the support that would be helpful that we discussed would be the sort of legal framework, sharing what others are doing. And another one was looking at sort of flexi time and the different ways of recording that, particularly when we are working in a mixture of home and office-based working.
Sophie, that was fabulous. Thank you very much. And I don't know whether we'll get anybody else that will say seeing pets as one of the highlights, but let's see, let's test it. So, Linz, last but not least, who's going to provide your feedback?
Thanks, Jo. So Vivian's going to do it. Bless her, she was the only one that actually spoke up. So we had a load of shy pockets in our group, but yeah, Vivian.
Yes, well, clearly not where I work, because Sophie works with me, and I'm very pleased to see that that she's stepped forward for that. So that's really good. Okay, do you know what? A lot of obviously very similar discussion in terms of the benefits. You know, those that talk around the home, work-life balance, being really important to people, particularly driven by less travel as well. Obviously, the savings in terms of travel. Less interruption, and much more able to do much more focused work. And again, noted that we're seeing that increase in productivity, more discretionary effort, those sorts of things. So, and particularly a benefit is that enhanced package and that offering in terms of, enabling people to work in a hybrid way. So, again, we touched on environmental impact. So, all of those things that everyone's covered already. So in terms of disbenefits, again, it was just that real, the lack of team bonding through not being together in the office, that reduction in terms of those off-the-cuff creative sessions, or, those discussions that take place in the workforce, in the workplace. So again, we touched on, the difficulties that it brings in terms of recruitment and training and progression, and we particularly talked about the impact on younger people, and if they're new to a role or new to the world of work, and we talked about the disconnect as well in between work and home. So how do we ensure that people disconnect when they're at home? So so that they are making the most of being at home. In terms of learning, again, I think we might have interpreted this slightly different, but in terms of learning, I interpret it as the significant learning, I think, that came out was that people missed being on the shop floor. They missed that engagement. And I think that's maybe not come as a surprise, but, it's, I think people have really realized that, and, recognizing that, when they are now in the workplace, the bonds are much more genuine, and they really appreciate how much that interaction has been missed and how much it impacted them. In terms of support, obviously, you know, we are in the world of the unknown. So, you know, perhaps, you know, a regular check-in in 3 months' time, in 6 months' time, to see how we're all getting along, you know, how we're moving forward, how we're being impacted. And we talked, I think, Sophie, you touched on this as well, about that legal framework. We talked about equality, you know, that equality and diversity consideration when considering whether people can, or, you know, or how they might work from home. And, you know, particularly if you're an SME, you might not have exposure to making those decisions and all the things that you need to consider. And it can be quite catastrophic if you don't get that quite right. And so I think there could be some support there in terms of just, you know, explaining to people how to take a pragmatic approach in terms of that decision-making process. So yes, that's us.
Vivian and team, thank you very much. Great readout. I mean, I think for me, the thing that's really interesting is there was some commonalities across the 3 sessions and a real consistency on some of the, you know, duality between the benefits and the disbenefits. Productivity on one hand, people not knowing when to start and stop on the other. So I think it's looking at some of those dualities will be interesting going forward. Now, we were going to, and it was much more important that we heard from everyone in the room, but one thing I'm very conscious of, we have an unanswered Q&A before I do the wrap up. So because Tom very kindly joined us when Joe left to deal with any legal questions, Tom, sorry, the one question that's come through chat is from one of your fellow panel members. What consideration, Sorry, Tom. Yeah, Mark, you can ask your question yourself. It's your question.
Yeah, it was just about, in excellent support as normal from Joe and yourself, Tom, is that what we're considering is once we've basically gone into an individual case-by-case basis, that people will put in a request for this hybrid working, and then the manager will, based on an assessment of it, which we will give these guidelines to. Our concern probably going forward is that later on would that be open to discrimination, because people say, well, you've allowed that person to be do hybrid work, but you're not allowing to me, and then you've got all the GDPR, but individual circumstances are different, and how do we explain that? And funnily enough, I think we'll have this balance between people who will want to work permanently at home, people who won't want to come in, and then these people in the middle who want to, yeah, I want to work, I want to do a bit of hot desking, but I certainly want to work at home on a Monday and a Friday. And how do we get that balance and not open ourselves up to discrimination for individual reasons?
Okay,
Tom,
so
your moment in the spotlight.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Mark. Nice, easy question. Cheers. There's 2 aspects to it. So what you were saying there was a danger of treating people differently as the process evolves. So that does open up claims for direct discrimination if it's clear that male has been treated differently to female because of the male-female. I think probably that's a remote risk, because you'd need the 2 circumstances to be essentially the same, and it's quite unusual that they would be, because they probably have to be doing exactly the same job and having made exactly the same request. That's probably a bit remote. The bigger risk is one that really already exists now with the flexible working regime. So at the moment, someone puts in a flexible working request, I want to work 2 days a week from, instead of 5. And it can be rejected relatively easily. But what employers quite often overlook is that rejection could amount to indirect discrimination. So the typical form of that is for women making flexible working requests on a return from maternity leave, wanting to take more time off to care for child, and it's rejected out of hand, and the employer doesn't have any justification for that. So that's where it's a problem for you. And the way that you combat that sounds a bit harsh, but the way you combat it is essentially to, before you start applying those guidelines, before you put those guidelines in place, for every part of those guidelines, think about what is the business justification for why you are putting in place the guidelines that you're putting in place. And the reason for that is it's only indirect discrimination if you can't show that it's a proportionate way. Proportionate means of achieving effectively a business aim, a legitimate business aim. So if for every decision you've got a legitimate aim and what you're doing is proportionate, then you'll be able to defend any claims. So it's actually about getting it right now by getting your guidelines right. Sorry, got a phone call then, just as I was on. Yeah, it's about getting it absolutely, your guidelines right now and your rationale done at this point in time. But then still considering it obviously reasonably when you get the requests.
Right answer. Thanks, Tom.
Brilliant, Tom. Thank you. I'm now going to bring us, because we promised we were going to close on time, and I know that people are now having to leave for other meetings. So can I say a huge thank you to our speakers, to Rachel, who herself has to go to another meeting, to Mark, to Barry, to Joe, who's had to go to another meeting, and finally to Sarah, and for Tom for that sort of final response to Mark's question. Really, really appreciate your time and your participation. So thank you for joining us. We've captured everything that you've said, and one of the things that we really do want to do is think about how do we do some more of these sessions going forward on the topics that are most of interest to you. So once again, many thanks for joining us, really appreciated, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, bye-bye.